Tra-la-la. I bounced over to the door where Rebecca and Danny were already in line. Today was the day of Dave Pinkley's author visit. I didn't really like his books, but I'd never met a real life author before. I also had a book of his that I just bought for the BBLL tucked away under my shirt. I wanted to get it autographed. Mr. Vaughn led us to the cafeteria where we sat in a big half circle with the rest of the fourth grade. Miss Jones stood in the middle of the circle at the projector cart with a man I guessed was Mr. Pinkley. He was a white, medium sized, and not too old, with short brown hair and a flowery Hawaiian shirt. He smiled at something Miss Jones said to him, and then she called for our attention. All right, fourth graders, I am very pleased to introduce an author whose books many of you have read and enjoyed. I know I have. Dave Pinkley, Miss Jones said. His name, like Dave, even though it was spelled DAV, is the author of more than 50 books, most of which he also illustrated, including The Dumb Bunnies, Ricky Ricardo, and of course, Captain Underpants. He's also the winner of the Caldecott Honor for the Paperboy in a number of his Reader Choice Awards around the country. That last part Mrs. Jones said after Principal Banskowska came into the room to stand by the door, I noticed. I'm sure Mr. Pinkley will tell you lots more about his life and his books, so I'll turn things over to him. Let's give a big Shelbourne Elementary welcome to Mr. Dave Pinkley, she said. Everybody cheered, mostly just for the sake of being able to clap and yell at school, but I cheered because I was really happy he was here. Mr. Pinkley showed us slides of things he had drawn when he was a kid and told us how he was always getting in trouble at school and getting sent into the hall to sit by himself. I glanced over at Principal Banskowska when he said that, and she didn't look too happy. The kids around me were all loving it, though. Mr. Pinkley was funny, and everyone was laughing. Then Mr. Pinkley talked about when he drew his first comics and how they weren't spelled right and didn't look as good as he can draw now, and how none of that mattered because they were a lot of fun and made his friends laugh. You don't have to spell well or be great at grammar to be a writer, he told us, and you don't have to be able to draw perfectly to be an artist. Then he gave us examples of famous artists who broke the rules and painted houses upside down, and famous writers who didn't always use the right spelling or grammar. Some of the teachers didn't like that so much either. It wasn't until Mr. Pinkley was in college that a teacher saw his drawings and told him he should be writing and drawing books for kids. That was how he became a book author. He finished his talk, showed us how to draw pictures of Captain Underpants, and asked us if we had any questions. I put my hand up, but so did a lot of other kids. The questions they asked were dumb. Did you write those books? How much money do you make? Where do you get your ideas? I like to draw comics too, which wasn't even a question. Do you know any famous authors? Can you draw Batman? And then he called on me. My heart was racing, and I asked, what do you think about your books being banned from our library? The room got very quiet, and I tried very hard not to look at Principal Banskowska. Mr. Pinkley smiled. Well, I wish they were on the shelves where anybody could read them, he said. I think it's important that libraries be the place where you can find all kinds of books, good ones, bad ones, funny ones, serious ones. Every person should be free to read whatever they want, whenever they want, and not have to explain to anyone else why they like it or why they think it's valuable. I hope you all get a chance to read my book someday. I smiled, my heart still thumping so loud in my chest I thought everyone could hear it. The one copy of Captain Underpants I bought before the author visit was going to be checked out forever. I looked over at Principal Banskowska again. She had her arms folded and was glaring, but not at Mr. Pinkley and not at me. She was glaring at Mrs. Jones. People asked more questions, mostly dumb ones, and then Miss Jones said we were out of time. Everyone cheered again to thank Mr. Pinkley for being there, and then the teacher started dismissing us by class. Mr. Fawn, can I go meet the author? I begged. He nodded. Come right back to class afterwards, he told me. I grabbed Rebecca and Danny without asking if they could come too and hurried across the room to where Mrs. Jones stood with Mr. Pinkley. Mrs. Jones hugged me while we waited for a couple of kids from the other class to be done showing their comics to Mr. Pinkley. My little rebel, Miss Jones said to me. Rebel? Me? The two boys who had drawn the comics were finally called away by their teacher, and we got to say hello. That's when I realized I couldn't say anything to him about the BBLL, not with Miss Jones standing there, and that's all I'd come to talk about. Rebecca, Danny, and I just stood there smiling up at him. For a long time, he smiled back like he was waiting for us to say something, but after a while, his smile began to falter. So, do any of you guys like to draw? Mr. Pinkley asked us. We all shook our heads. So, do you like to write? We all shook our heads. Mr. Pinkley laughed. Well, do you like to read at least, I hope? Oh, yeah, Rebecca said. You have no idea. A student tripped over the cord of the projector cart, and Miss Jones hurried away to take care of it. Finally, I looked around once to make sure no one else was watching and pulled the Captain Underpants book from under my shirt. Will you sign this? I asked Mr. Pinkley. He looked surprised and took the book from me. He looked even more surprised when he saw the cover. Smell my finger, he said. The cover had a picture of a kid with a stinky finger and another kid passed out on the ground beside him. That's just on the outside, I told Mr. Pinkley, and I opened the book to show him what was inside. The Adventures of Captain Underpants. Oh, he said. He flipped through it and found the envelope I pasted in the back with a checkout card. Oh, he said. He looked again at the fake cover. Who did the art? Our friend MJ. He's in fifth grade, Danny said. Tell him I said it's great. I should write a real book called Smell My Finger. He looked around so to see if anybody was looking. So I'm guessing your teachers don't know you have this? We shook our heads. I see, he said. He took the Sharpie from his pocket and opened the book to the front page. Anyone in particular I should make it out to? The BBLL, Danny said. BBLL, he asked, who he wrote in the book, to the BBLL, and drew a quick sketch of Captain Underpants saying, tra la la, under his signature. Do I want to know what the BBLL stands for? He asked as he handed it back. I stuffed the book under my shirt. Probably not, I said. All right, well, keep reading, you guys, and don't get in too much trouble. Miss Jones came back. Mr. Pinkley, when you're done with these three, I have one more student for you to meet. I almost squeaked. Miss Jones had brought Trey McBride to see the author. Why? I sucked in my stomach, praying he couldn't see the burk under my shirt. We have to get back to class, I said. I grabbed Rebecca and Danny and ran off so fast Mr. Pinkley barely had time to call bye to us. A present. The Adventures of Captain Underpants never made it to the banned books locker library. It was checked out even before I got back to class, and it stayed checked out with a waiting list. I was going to have to save up and buy the rest of them now. I might even have to read it myself. That afternoon, from my spot in the corner of the library, I watched as Miss Jones thanked Mr. Pinkley and helped him get ready to go. He told her he had a great time and thanked her for fighting the good fight. He spotted me watching from the corner, and I ducked back behind the London Eye Mystery. When I peeked out again, he had pulled something out of his bag and was whispering something to Miss Jones. She looked back at me with a curious expression on her face. Mr. Pinkley's ride to the airport arrived, and he and Miss Jones shook hands and said goodbye. When he was gone, Miss Jones called me up to the front desk. Mr. Pinkley was very impressed with you, Amy Ann, Miss Jones told me. She had that same curious expression on her face like she was trying to figure something out. In fact, he left you a present. A present? Miss Jones looked around the same way I had in the cafeteria to make sure no one was watching and then brought a boxed set of books up from beneath her desk. It was every single Captain Underpants book there was. 12 books. For me, I said. Miss Jones watched me closely. He said you know what to do with them. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This was the biggest single donation in the history of the band's book locker library. I do, I said, and I scooped them up. Amy Ann, Miss Jones said, you know not to show these around school, right? I nodded, already thinking about how to get in touch with MJ as soon as possible. We were going to need a lot of more fake covers.